Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani. Today's video, we're going to be talking about testosterone and prolactin and why it can screw up your hormonal cycle. It can be a major cause of fertility issues, lots of PMS symptoms, other issues including skin issues, abnormal hair growth, a whole bunch of other symptoms and just not feeling well overall. We'll dive into the underlying physiology of why that is the case. Before we do, make sure you smash that like button, click down below, put your comments down below. And if you're enjoying the content, make sure you give it a share. All right, so there's three major hormones that can go kind of awry, so to speak, when we have hormonal issues. So we have prolactin, which is a compound produced by the pituitary. Now, it can be produced by a benign tumor called a prolactinoma. You can also have increased prolactin issues with stress. So things like when you deplete your dopamine, when you have lots of stress and inflammation, dopamine can get depleted. And dopamine is a feel-good neurotransmitter. It can be used to make adrenaline, and it can also, and cortisol, the more cortisol kind of is stimulated, adrenaline and cortisol work together. So the more we stimulate our adrenal glands, that's the cortisol, that's the outer compound made by the adrenals, we start to make more adrenaline, which is going to be more of the neurotransmitter that's intimately connected with cortisol. And adrenaline will get pulled from dopamine. So the more chronically stressed we're at, we're going to actually decrease dopamine. And dopamine is the brake pedal for prolactin. So if we have, imagine your brake pedal's down, right? That's dopamine. As your dopamine starts to drop, what's happening? Foot's coming off the brake. What's happening to prolactin? Prolactin starts coming up, right? Because foot's on the brake, right? That's dopamine. Foot's off the brake, prolactin comes up. Now, as prolactin starts to come up, it can dysregulate the HPA axis. Obviously, prolactin, for women who are pregnant and who have conceived, prolactin stimulates those milk ducts to release breast milk, which is good, right? That's a good thing. But when it's not coming during pregnancy and or post-pregnancy during breastfeeding, it's not a good thing. So it can start to disrupt the female hormone cycle. There's associations with prolactin and PCOS, and there's association with prolactin and estrogen dominance. So is there a direct causal link? It's hard to say, but there's a lot of association in the literature with those conditions. Now, what's happening in those conditions? Obviously, with estrogen dominance, we're starting to have higher levels of estrogen in relationship to progesterone. So our hormonal balance, especially in the luteal phase, the last half of the cycle. So think follicular phase, first half, right? F for follicular, first half. L for luteal, last half. So in the last half of your cycle, progesterone starts to rise, right? It peaks out around day 20, 22, and then drops. When we start to have estrogen dominance, that ratio, that progesterone either doesn't come up as high or it drops out early, and or estrogen may actually come up a little bit higher in the first half of the cycle than it typically would in the past. So estrogen dominance starts to disrupt, because high levels of estrogen can actually potentiate prolactin's effects. So it makes prolactin more powerful when we have high levels of estrogen. Also, in PCOS, the underlying mechanism is high levels of insulin, right? Too much carbohydrate, too much inflammation, we can drive up insulin. Insulin then upregulates certain enzymes that convert estrogen to testosterone. So now you start to have elevations in androgens and testosterone, and that can start to cause more prolactin as well, right? Is it 100% causal? It's hard to say. When you start to, like, I always look upstream, right? Because when you look upstream, there's only a couple of things that are happening upstream. When you look downstream, there's a lot of things that are happening, right? Different enzymes, different cytokines, different things happening. But when you start to disrupt estrogen, progesterone, when you start to cause more blood sugar issues, which then cause more cortisol problems, more dopamine problems, when you start getting more stressed emotionally, physically, and chemically, dopamine, adrenaline, cortisol imbalances, and then now we start throwing in blood sugar, and that really starts increasing insulin. Insulin starts causing more androgens. Androgens, high levels of androgens can make prolactin issues worse. So when you start to have high levels of estrogen, higher levels of prolactin due to stress, and then you start adding in high levels of testosterone from insulin, now the whole cycle starts getting messed up, right? The female cycle now, maybe a lot of hemorrhagia, a lot of bleeding, maybe you're skipping periods. Maybe you are having lots of PMS, breast tenderness, cramping, bloating, just moody, irritable, right? So all of these things can throw you off. And then, of course, one of the biggest driving factors of infertility is going to be high levels of testosterone and insulin, typically driven by PCOS, or those things actually drive PCOS. PCOS is the effect, right? And testosterone is going to be the cause, usually by insulin and blood sugar dysregulation and crappy carbohydrates. So you start to have insulin resistance when your blood sugar starts going higher and higher and higher. Your cells have to make more insulin. They get numb to it. The second is when you start to have blood sugar fluctuations like this, even if your blood sugar comes back down and looks pretty later on during a blood sugar test, you're still surging insulin every time it goes up and down. So the goal is that we snake our blood sugar along, which then allows less insulin surges, okay? High levels of insulin is going to cause more testosterone. More testosterone and prolactin tend to be connected. That can start to dysregulate the cycle. Now we have HPA axis issues. Now we have high levels of estrogen, whether it's from progesterone dropping, right? Because as progesterone drops, it can be converted to cortisol. That just causes more of the ratio of progesterone to estrogen to skew. That's estrogen dominance as well. You don't have to increase estrogen to be more estrogen dominant. Just lowering progesterone can drive estrogen dominance. But then you add in xenoestrogens, pesticides, plastics, other environmental compounds, hormones in meat. That adds more hormones. So women today are just being absolutely assaulted with chemicals. And then their bodies, when they get under more stress, that starts to disrupt the cycle. And then if you start jumping on birth control pills or other synthetic hormones that aren't fixing the underlying issue, you can see it could take years to kind of get on top of this to really fix the underlying issue. So prolactin and testosterone, big issues in women and their cycles. Prolactin, got to look at the adrenals, got to look at stress, got to look at dopamine, got to support the nutrients that are being depleted, B vitamins, tyrosine. Vitamin C, got to support the adrenals. Make sure a really good solid paleo template that's balancing blood sugar, good fats, good proteins. That really helps the insulin surges and making sure we're not going too long between meals. When you have hormonal issues, intermittent fasting and lots of fasting techniques probably aren't the best because we want to signal a constant flow of nutrition to the body, right? When your body's healthier, not having food for 6 to 8 hours when you're awake, not as big of a deal because your body has the ability to adapt. But we want to send constant flows of nutrients in the bloodstream so the body's like, ooh, I can rely on these amino acids, I can rely on these fatty acids, I can rely on these B vitamins and nutrients and minerals. Now, in general, ideally going every 4 or 5 hours is great. And as you get healthier, then you can do more intermittent fasting. But how we work on the insulin sensitivity issue isn't through long periods of time of not eating. It's going to be through just restricting a lot of the carbohydrate and focusing more on vegetables and good fats and healthy proteins, good healthy animal fats and proteins, and mostly non-starchy vegetables that are all going to be organic and high quality. So again, if you have hormonal issues, whether it's you're a menopausal woman with this issue or a cycling woman with this issue, you want to really get to the underlying root issue. And conventional medicine is typically going to just throw you on glucophage or metformin, maybe a birth control pill. And then if you're still complaining to them, they'll probably give you an antidepressant after that. They're not really going to get to the root underlying issue unless you're dealing with a functional or integrative doctor that really has an understanding of supporting normal physiology and also diet and nutrition and blood sugar. So really important. If you want to dive in or reach into someone that's educated in this, reach into myself down below. There's a link where you can schedule. And if you want to dive in deeper, I'm here to help y'all worldwide. All right. Hope you enjoyed today's content. We'll open it up here for questions for y'all too. Can topical progesterone or estrogen negatively impact the body, a person? I have mold toxicity, H. pylori, plus yeast overgrowth, candida. I am on binders and fungal prescription. Yeah, so I don't like doing a lot of estrogen creams or progesterone creams, especially if you're cycling, because you put that cream in your body, it can sometimes take a while for that cream to come out. So that cream, imagine you have sub-Q tissue underneath the skin. Imagine that like a sponge. It can sit in that sponge for days, and over time, even if you've been doing it for years, it could even take weeks, maybe months for it to come out. I saw this maybe 10 years ago when I was doing a lot of salivary cortisol tests. I would take my females, or I'd see females on progesterone cream. They'd be off it for a month or two, and their salivary progesterone was still through the roof, like 10x above normal physiological range. And so I started to have this understanding that progesterone can sit in your system a very long time for some people. So I'm not as big of a fan for topical progesterone. If you do it topically, the vaginal tissue is better because the mucosa is very thin and there's not a lot of reservoir down there tissue-wise. It tends to get used up. And if women are in menopausal range, sometimes there's a lot of vaginal dryness. That tissue down there really eats up progesterone, and estriol likes it. It gets really hydrated with it. A lot of vaginal dryness can be supported via that. But typically, for most people, I like to do hormones sublingually because I get better absorption that way. And the only, I would say, cream option that may be better would be intervaginal as a good option for you. All right. Question: how do we really find out what ingredients? Oh, I can't answer that question. That's I am censored to talk about certain things. You guys can kind of read between the lines on that. All right, suspecting I may have a thyroid issue, getting TSH, free T3, and free T4 measured via blood test. Could this tell me much? Yeah, so TSH, T3 free, those are all thyroid hormones. T4 free is all good. Suspecting I may have a thyroid issue. Yeah, these could give you some good intel. Now, if you have imbalances there, you'd want to look deeper at thyroid antibodies, and that will give you more intel on what's happening there. What can be done about bile acid malabsorption? Any solutions? So I'm not understanding what you mean by malabsorption. Usually with bile acids, there's a bile acid malproduction, right? We're not producing it, whether it's the bile acids are just sitting in our gallbladder because we're eating a low-fat diet, therefore we're not releasing it, or we're not eating good proteins and fats consistently, and maybe we don't have enough acid or enzyme production to stimulate it. So I would look at it as more of like a stimulation release issue. And I'd also, if we had gallbladder issues, I'd also want to make sure there's not like food allergens that are driving a lot of those issues too. I forgot to mention insulin 3.5. That's good. Yeah, so insulin levels are going to be, 2 to 5 is ideal. Under 7 is good. And then for testosterone, like a free testosterone for a female, we want to be below, for a free, probably like around below 6 to 5 for a free testosterone. And for a total, probably under 45 or so. I like somewhat in the middle of the reference range, and that, one standard deviation to the left, to the right is kind of ideal. What causes light color stool? So if it's getting more blonde or clay color, that could be a fat malabsorption, not breaking down fat well, inadequate bile and or fat digestive capacity. Hey doc, removing gluten, dairy, vegetable oils, unwanted sugary foods, and packaged foods, adding in ACV and bile alongside veggies, and only rice has carbs, has made digestion better. You are great. Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. So and only rice. Yeah, so I would, it just depends. If you're doing great, fine. If you're doing awesome, excellent. If not, I would pull out the rice and try to do a safe starch carb option. Squash, sweet potatoes, maybe even white potatoes. I just don't like grains as a staple. If like you're telling me, hey, this is a one-off thing, it's more of a treat, I don't do it all the time, then fine. As long as you're doing good and your health's in good shape, that's great. Can stiff muscles be due to rigor mortis in a living person? Well, rigor mortis, it's literally just Latin for, I think, stiff muscles, right? Now it's because the person is dead and their heart's not pumping. And then due to the heart not pumping, you don't have nutrition, oxygen, all the nutrients, all the ATP, so the muscles lock up due to oxygenation, blood flow, nutrition type of situation. So could inflammation decrease blood flow? Can inflammation increase coagulation and decrease blood flow and make tissues more stiff? Absolutely. Inflammation can do it. But again, when a person dies and their body's left over getting stiff, it's not an inflammation issue. It's a lack of blood flow, lack of nutrition, lack of oxygen, because there is no blood flow due to the heart stopping and all the things that happen when you die. So totally different thing, but inflammation can drive it. That's why the more inflamed you are, the more stiff, and the more your tissues become like beef jerky versus a soft tenderloin. So getting your inflammation down, good, healthy kind of paleo template out of the gates, keeping your carbs under control, and supporting good omega-3 fats is very helpful. Can I supplement iodine if deficient? I have a secondary hypo, but have 350 micrograms per day, so might increase below 1,050. Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, keep it below the milligram or so per day supplementally, just because there's a lot of data on high levels of iodine causing more issues. So I'm always very careful of starting low and working up. Bile acid burning in my stools when I eat protein and or fats. So yeah, that's like bile acid diarrhea. So there's probably underlying gut issues and inflammation issues you want to look at in your gut. A friend is burping a lot 2 hours after meals, diets paleo AIP, but they are up to 4 HCLs and 3 enzymes. Gut is clean. What should be the next step? Well, there's something happening in the stomach, so you may want to look at cutting out fermentable carbohydrates, maybe cooking the food better. There's definitely a lack of breaking something down in the stomach. I would look at FODMAPs and carbohydrates and really restrict a lot of, and maybe even plant foods to see how much of that is fermenting in the gut. Maybe add in some ginger too. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed today's chat. If you did and you want to reach out because you have some issues, feel free to click down below and you can reach out to myself and staff worldwide. If you enjoyed the content, thumbs up, share it with friends and family.